welcome to Beyond Focus TV. My name is Angie Daniel, and I am the hostess for the show. Tonight's show, we have with us Dr. Aletha Maybank. She is the Assistant Commissioner of the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, I'm going to introduce her to you so we can talk about this healthy ways of living. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We are here with Dr. Aletha Maybank. This is a continuity of a conversation that we've had before. So I know that the community probably knows a little bit about you. So I'll introduce you and then you tell me just briefly who you are.
Okay, so Assistant Commissioner, New York City Department of Health, and specifically I oversee the Brooklyn District Public Health Office. And those offices were placed just really to focus on what's happening locally. So they're kind of the community arms of the health department. Okay. And there's one in South Bronx, one in East and Central Harlem, and then I oversee the one in North Central Brooklyn. And specifically the communities are Bed-Stuy, Bushwick, East New York, and Brownsville. Because we do know in Brooklyn they have some of the worst health outcomes, not only really in Brooklyn, but across the city as well. So we really try to focus our attention and resources in those areas.
Okay. The last time you were here, we had this lengthy conversation of what portion control was and how the portion control within our community is affecting our kids, specifically our young community. And we wanted to continue the conversation, but what I was thinking that the community would benefit more from today is if we talk about diabetes. I think it's one of the things that people see, they talk about, but not understanding the end-death aspect of it. So can you tell us a little bit about what diabetes are?
Sure, and to your point, you know, and especially in our communities, it's not understood, but everybody hears about it, right? And everybody, almost to a certain degree, especially in the African-American community, feels that everybody's going to get diabetes, is destined to get diabetes, which is not the case, and why it's important to know a little bit more about it. And so there are the three types of diabetes: type 1, which we also call juvenile onset, type 2, which used to be called adult onset, but we don't refer to it as much as that anymore because now we're starting to see it in teenagers and adolescents, and even a little younger. And so we now call it, consistently call it type 2, and then there's also gestational diabetes, in which a woman can get when she's pregnant. Okay. And so, type 1 diabetes, all diabetes are serious if they're not controlled. They need to be managed, they need to be diagnosed, they need to be managed, and you need to be talking to a physician about it. Okay. Type 1 diabetes, really juvenile onset, hereditary. Insulin is typically the treatment. Okay. I was going to skip to gestational diabetes, happens during pregnancy, can be due to poorly controlled diet, also can have a hereditary aspect to it as well.
I was going to ask you that question. Is it hereditary?
It can be. I mean, with pregnancy, some things that have happened before and other family members can definitely happen to you, but also is one of those diabetes that can be controlled too by diet or helped out by doing making sure you eat well and follow up with your exams during your pregnancy.
Okay, quick question for type 1 diabetes. Would that be hereditary also?
Yes, type 1 diabetes is typically hereditary too as well. All right. So type 2 diabetes, though, is the one that we hear the most about, the one that's really truly the epidemic in not only New York City, but really across the country. We know in New York City, almost 700,000 people probably live with type 2 diabetes. 200,000 of those individuals, or a third of them, probably don't even know it. Okay. And so diagnosis is extremely important. Screening is very important when you go to a physician's office. And there are certain things that we look for. The other thing, when we look at, again, African American communities compared to other communities, our rates are higher. Type 2 diabetes, almost about 13%. Of the prevalence is among African Americans, 11% are Hispanics, and 6.2% are in whites. Okay. And then when we look at North and Central Brooklyn, the rates are high as well, 13% compared to 9% of the rest of the city. So a serious and significant problem in communities of color and low-income communities as well.
Okay, I wanted to mention there's a reason why there's a reason why we feel like that a certain community or a certain group of people are affected by this disease more than others. What are the reasons in terms of your studies as the health commissioner?
Well, I think, having a conversation, what I talked about before is I think it's just so prevalent. And so, because obesity is prevalent, diabetes is prevalent, and it just almost became or is the social norm per se. It's beyond the social norm, almost a medical norm.
Okay.
And it's very difficult to treat in the sense of you have to be diligent in treating it. And I think it does take a lot of community and individual help and support in order for that to happen. And so I think a lot of our conversation has to focus on how do we help people control their diabetes? What are some things that need to happen within the doctor's office? What are some things that need to happen in the community? And then how do we also prevent diabetes? Because as I said, it is preventable as far as for the type 2 part of it. Or there are many ways that you can actually, even if you get a diagnosis, there are people who will get rid of that diagnosis based on changing some of the things that they do in their lifestyle.
Okay, Dr. Maybank, quick question. Can you explain to what is diabetes? What does that entail? Like when you go to a doctor and says you suffer from diabetes, what is that?
Basically, your insulin levels, we heard them, your glucose levels and your insulin levels are out of whack. And once your glucose levels are out of control, or people refer to as sugar in a layman's term, but really try to stick to glucose. Once those levels are elevated consistently and for a long period of time, they start to affect the organs of your body. Your body can't handle that amount of glucose, right? And it can't handle that amount of insulin either. And so what happens is, your little tiny vessels, the macro vessels, start to get irritated per se. It's a term that I'm using, but they start to get damaged basically. And so what do you notice? That people start to get tingling in their fingers, they start to get numbness in their toes, to the point where we hear a lot about amputations and they can't feel their toes anymore, and so they will get injured very easily and they'll have to be cut off. Very kidney damage, because again there are a lot of micro vessels that are there. Same with the eyes. Blindness, serious cause of blindness in this country, as well as type 2 diabetes.
I know there are, like you mentioned glucose control. What are the ways that, first we should talk about prevention, right, before we get to how you can control it once you have it. What are the ways of preventing?
Well, I'll say what ways of control, because the ways of preventing it prevent a lot of other things as well, right? And so when we talk about control, we're talking about one, making sure, like I said, that you go to your physician and you are diligent following up. You take your medicines, right? So sometimes there are oral medicines that you take, and a lot of times for type 2 diabetes, they can be treated with oral medications. If serious and severe enough, sometimes you have to do insulin injections, but for the most part, you should be able to take the oral meds, and you have to be diligent on them. Secondly, you have to watch.
I have a quick question before that. When you go for your physical, right, is there a specific test that you should ask for?
Sure, absolutely. And there are certain things that a doctor should screen for too. So if somebody's blood pressure is greater than 135 over 80 or so.
So if your blood pressure is over 135/80.
Or, right, 135 over 80, and you're overweight at the same time. What they say, a body mass index greater than 25, which is a high, on the higher level, and your body mass index is really your weight against your height. And there's a whole chart that has of how to measure all of that, and your physician knows how to do that.
I mean, seeing the chart, right? I don't want to deviate too much, but just seeing the chart, understanding our body type as, African Americans or people of color, whatever you want to call it, we have, wouldn't you say we have a different body mass as to what's on the chart? I really believe that, because I'm 5'3", right? And then on the chart, it says I'm supposed to weigh 125 pounds.
Right. There's a lot of conversation about that. And there's a lot of, I think, appropriate question and inquiry as to, do the charts, are they representative of all races, ethnicities in a sense? Race is a social construct, so, race or ethnicity per se. And so I think there are definitely more studies that are being done to see, is there a different body type, among the ethnicities and races that are here, and is the chart applicable to everybody? But for right now, this is what we have. And we do know, if we look at the diabetes rate at least, and there are obesity rates tied to the diabetes, we do have higher rates of diabetes. So we have to have an honest conversation and look at that too, because we do have higher numbers. of prevalence of diabetes, and we're dying higher from it at higher rates as well.
Okay, we're going to take a short break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about like how people can prevent it and how people can control it. So before I take a break, I just want the community to understand like your pressure cannot be, if it's above 135, 90, 80, right?
That's not normal pressure. Normal pressure, your good pressure should be less than 120 over 80.
Okay. So anything above 135, you should have yourself.
Definitely. Check your glucose checked or something.
Okay. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back with this information. Welcome back to Beyond Focus TV. We are here having a conversation on diabetes with Dr. Aletha Maybank from the Health Department. Before we took a break, we were talking about like how people will know that they are sick, like understanding what diabetes are, understanding when you should see your doctors. We talked about the high blood pressure, the pressure being above 120, above 80. So you should be alert.
135 over 80, right.
You should be alert.
Yeah, the doctor should definitely be alert, should be screening you. If you are overweight or obese, you definitely should be screened. If you're having symptoms of, a lot of urination, thirsty, you should be screened as well. And the tests that they usually screen for are, they do a hemoglobin A1C, which really kind of it's a test of the red blood cell. Okay. So it's a long-term test, and it tells how long your glucose levels have been elevated for. And if that level is greater than or equal to 6.5, then that's of concern, and usually typically goes along with the diagnosis of diabetes.
Okay. Wait, let me ask you a question. Can you ask your doctor for that? For
Absolutely.
The test to be done? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, most doctors at this point in time are pretty in tune to ordering that. That's part of the standard of how you test and treat, or not treat, or how you screen and test for diabetes and diagnose. The other is a fasting plasma glucose, so when you haven't eaten, to test your glucose. Okay. Again, if that's greater than 126, again, more consistent with a diagnosis of diabetes, or an oral glucose tolerance test, another type of test, and if that's greater than 200. But your doctor's usually, at this point, definitely familiar with those exams and those tests, and should put you through those. The other things that you should have, your glucose, like I said, your cholesterol, a lipid profile to test kind of your bad cholesterol, your good cholesterol, your blood pressure should be done as well. Because some of the things to be aware of are that there are complications or other possibilities. So I mentioned all the things related to blindness, kidney disease, neuropathies, or what they call them when you don't have sensations. Exactly. Also, they call it the ABCs. So one, you check your hemoglobin A1C. This is to help prevent complications. Make sure that number is less than 7. 2, the B part is your blood pressure. Again, I said should be low, less than the 135 over 80. However, normal blood pressure is less than 120 over 80. And really, that's the goal of what your blood pressure should be. C is knowing the cholesterol levels and your lipid levels. The higher your HDL, the better. The lower your LDL, the better as well. And then if you smoke, you shouldn't smoke. Okay. Also, one of those things that complicate diabetes.
Okay. We've talked about like all the things that you can do beforehand. Let's say, for example, I go and get myself tested, and God forbid, I'd say, because I think it's one of those, things that you really, you could live with, but you shouldn't really. Like, if you can prevent it, you should prevent it. Like, and they say that you have type 2 diabetes. What are the ways of controlling?
Well, the ways of controlling are kind of what I mentioned before, and making sure all those levels are good, and taking your medicines, right? Controlling is making sure you take your medicines. The way you follow up is, if you're controlling, is making sure you get the proper blood work. So getting your hemoglobin A1C helps the doctor, and if your glucose is under control, and if your diabetes, rather, is under control. And you should be doing your D-sticks whenever, and that schedule is created based on how your diabetes presents. So that's usually a very individualized plan that you have to work out. And so once you do that, you have your individual plan, you're managing your glucose at home. It takes a lot of support. Diabetes is not an easy disease to manage to a certain degree. It really requires you to be very disciplined in checking your sugars and making sure you eat right. If you feel your body responding a certain way, making sure you follow up with your sugars and checking it at the same time, or else you can have some really serious complications, even on the short term. I know, individuals that from practicing medicine who have gone into, diabetic comas, we've heard that, or shock or something of that nature, because the glucose level becomes extremely high in the thousands.
How do you prevent that from happening?
From the same things, from making sure you are checking your glucose and your D-sticks when you need to, diligently, taking your meds whenever they are. If you're noticing that your D-sticks, even with the medications that you have, are not at the levels that they need to be or should be, then you need to follow up and tell your doctor right away so that they can adjust it so that where it needs to be. Making sure you take your long-term tests, like I said, the hemoglobin A1C, and then all the other things as far as related to complications, as I mentioned before, and preventing those, so things related to your blood pressure and your cholesterol and all those situations. And then mostly, you can really, and we can start having conversation, as far as how do you prevent all of this from happening, and as I said, diabetes can be preventable as type 2.
Quick question, Dr. Maybank. One of the things that I know for sure, like there's certain things, if it's happening to your body, you would know. Would there be symptoms for diabetes, and what are they if they're...
Right, so as I said, before, you can have a lot of urination. You can have, things of dehydration or dry mouth at the same time because you're urinating so much. Some people may feel a little weak, a little dizzy, because either your glucose can either go up or sometimes it can go down. So it just depends on how you respond, and that way will also determine your symptoms.
Okay,
and some people may not have any symptoms at all. Yes, and that's, because it's type 2, and in many people who are obese, like I said, there's about, out of the 700,000 that we think in New York City have diabetes, 500,000 of those actually are diagnosed with diabetes, but the other 200 or so thousand do not know that they have diabetes. And they might not be symptomatic in a way that they feel any different than they think they should feel. And there are also some exterior skin things. Like when you have hyperinsulinemia for a long time, so very high levels of insulin, it's called acanthosis nigra. They get it right around usually their neck or in their creases, and it's like a dark, you've probably seen it.
I've seen it.
Yeah, it's a very dark look to the skin, and right around the creases and the folds. Sometimes you'll see it here or you'll see it here. That's also an external symptom, which we see all the time, and people don't realize that's a symptom of having high levels of insulin.
Because it looks like it's a dry skin, or what people would call eczema. Yeah. So you just see that and you think, oh, that's all there is, and then you're gonna go to a dermatologist and not actually want to see a doctor for it. We've mentioned like community-wise in terms of how certain part of the community is getting sicker than the norm. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to talk about like how we can help the community create better ways of eating habits and exercising programs to help themselves. So we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Beyond Focus TV. Before we took a break, we were talking about like ways we can help ourselves take better care of ourselves within the community. You mentioned, I know you're really big in terms of food chart and exercising. So diabetes is one of the things that we need to talk about and help people.
Right. I mean, in the bottom line, with diabetes, it is preventable, as we said before. And diet definitely plays a tremendous role in how we prevent that, as well as many other diseases, that we see in our community. But one of the simple things that, I've talked about with communities, and my office goes out and talks about with communities, are portion control and how much we eat. We eat a lot. We eat too much food many times. Not often, is it depend on the type of foods we eat, which usually are many times not the best foods to eat, and especially in communities where you don't have access all the time to fruits and vegetables very readily, and there's a lot of processed foods in the community, and you have your bodegas and more so than your supermarkets, but just tons of processed foods. But it's also the quantity that we eat also tends to be a lot.
Quantity.
And in the Caribbean, right?
Yes.
We come from families of
rice
and beans, exactly, rice and beans, and we pile it on the plate. It's usually about half a plate. So this is a plate planner, and we make these at the City Department of Health. And I grew up and typically, the rice and beans took up half of the plate, right? But this is a plate, this size of the plate, so the outer border is a 9-inch plate, and that's what we say an adult size plate should be.
Okay.
The inside border, this one, we're saying is a plate size for a child, is 7 inches. Now, I'm not saying to go out and buy more plates, based on whether they're 9 or 7 inches. But there is one thing to be aware of, that our plate sizes now are typically much larger than 9 inches.
Yes.
They've gotten larger and larger and larger. So again, the more space you have somewhere, the more likely you're going to pile more food on. So it's just something to keep in mind. And so on this chart, it shows that half your plate should be of vegetables and some fruit.
Okay.
That should be half of your plate. I see your face. And then a quarter of the plate should be a protein, right? And then the other quarter should be the starch. Yes.
Okay.
That's what we recommend. And then you'll have your glass of water here with you on the table. And then if you choose to have dairy product, kids tend to have dairy more so fat-free or 1%. Another measure we say right here, and you can't see it so much, but you can look at your hand, and the palm of your hand should be what the size of your meat portion should be. All right?
Okay.
About that, right?
I have very big hands.
So you're lucky. And then your fist is about the size of how much rice and pasta that you should have on your plate, or any other kind of starch. Okay. The thumb, if you're going to have a dairy product, no more than your thumb. And then your thumb tip, they put peanut butter because this is also for our kids. Okay. If you're going to put anything to kind of sweeten the food at all, and put that on your plate. But this is a basic, and then there's a backside of what we say of what trying not to eat, related to chips because they're low in fiber, and things that are greasy and oily and fatty, sugary drinks, too much juice. Even though we say if you're going to have juice, you're making sure it's 100% fruit juice. Outside of that water. And then here just lists a whole bunch of other healthy options to put on your plate. But the one thing, as I said, the big thing is portion control, and really just watching how much you put on your plate. And you can follow this when if you're going out to eat. This is very simple. You have a sense of, clearly the restaurants, determine how much food is on your plate, but you could determine how much you eat on that plate. And if it is a lot, you can take half of it home, or you could take a portion of it home. It's harder because when it's in front of you, what we do know, people tend to eat it.
But wouldn't you say once people are out there are more likely to eat salads and fruits because it's available to them instead of buying it at home?
If you mean in a restaurant?
Yeah.
We hope so. If it's available, what we are seeing that a lot of restaurants now are providing healthier options, which is great.
And then they do a calorie count.
And they do, and New York City requires that if it's a chain restaurant, they must list the calories on the menus, or on the menu boards, or on the menus that you get served, if it's a chain restaurant. So those are ways, in which people can look to see, kind of in a relative term, because one thing I do recognize that people sometimes have a hard time of understanding calories, and what does that really mean, and on a basic term, calories are energy. You either burn them or you don't, right? And you really want to have some level of balance so that you maintain a certain level of weight. But as far as understanding the number, We usually say, as a recommendation to try not to go any more than 2,000 calories a day. And it depends on your physical fitness and
Not
your
only physical,
activity.
like I would say certain ways of that people cook. I mean, I remember looking at the chart and it says if you add beans to it and you add butter to it, you add oil to it, it just keeps adding. But in a community like, for example, as Haitians, you cook with so many different things, and if you keep adding like the calories from it, shouldn't there be like a basic idea of, like you said, the feast?
Right.
Like you have a certain amount of meat, you have a certain amount of vegetables, and you have a certain amount of carbs, and that should be the portion control. Because I don't think I can really, I mean, I'm speaking from the general public, like the idea, like general publicly. The idea of how much calories are within each meal, it's going to be really greater than what the lay person would be able to understand, but you can understand a portion control.
Absolutely, and you can order, and that's why we go to the plate, because the plate it's easier to understand how much to have on your plate or how much to adjust and control on your plate than sometimes it is the number itself. What you can look, relatively, when you walk into some restaurants and you look at, the drink per se and some of the shakes, those are 1,000 calories.
Yes.
So if we're giving you the number of 2,000, that's half of your calories in one drink. And so I think it's also a relative just kind of comparison, even if you don't completely understand the number.
Okay. Another thing that we've talked about, and I would love for you to cover it briefly, is what's available to the community in terms of greens, in terms of like what the community is doing to help people make better choices.
Right, and it's a great point because there's one thing we're clear, there's an overabundance of unhealthy food, but how we still need to have equity as it relates to getting healthy food into our communities. So one of there's several things that are happening, and this is how, it's a movement across the country, I think, of really trying to, how do you figure out how to get access to healthy food, especially in urban low-income communities. So we have farmers markets, and I think New York City has to be very proud of the amount of farmers markets that are now available. And this is a map we can get, and all these materials you can get from calling 311.
Okay.
And you can order them. You can have a whole bunch sent to your organization or whomever. And so this is our 2012 map of all the farmers markets, and there are farmers markets all over across the city,
and it's
in every borough.
Day. It's not just like on Saturdays.
Well, so this map on the back then lists all the markets. There's 138 markets on this list, right? And about 50 of them are right here in Brooklyn. And so for each market, it lists where it's located, but then it also lists the day that it's open. So you could, potentially find a market open on every single day. It might not be that same market, but you can see them that they're open. And then the great thing in New York City is that this year, you've heard of the Health Bucks program. I talked about it last time, where you spend $5 and you get $2 more in return if you use an EBT card, or historically known as food stamps. You can use them at all farmers markets now, which is amazing. And it's really a way to promote and increase the use of farmers markets, which have fresh food, great quality. People talk about cost, but what we find, it's not. It's not that costly, and looking relative again to other different things that you buy on your day-to-day in the community, I always say it's a relative cost. And if we're thinking about our health,
it's a long-term investment. You have to think about,
exactly.
This is your health. This is what carries you on. So if you are limiting your own health, then, because I think you benefit from that at the end of the day, or your kids benefit from it.
Absolutely. And it's a great place to take kids too, I think. Because we're finding a lot of kids in our communities don't know the names of fruits and vegetables. So it's a good way to invite and to kind of reintroduce or introduce people in our communities to fruits and vegetables. And it's not just children, it's actually some adults and teenagers too. But they're very community oriented. There are a lot of things that are going on. Some of them have play streets, some of them have cooking demonstrations or classes in healthy eating. And there are certain markets that do that, and this will tell you on this pamphlet. But I definitely encourage the use of farmers markets.
Okay, so this is the end of our show. Besides the farmers market listing, is there anything you would like for the community to either call your office or go on 311 and check out?
Right, and so we also have the green carts that are in certain communities across the city that are available with fruits and vegetables as well. And we're working with the bodegas to make sure that fruits and vegetables are placed in the bodegas as well, and working with the owners. But the important thing, again, is demand. all of these things still have a profit. You know, farmers they come to the farmers markets, they sell their product and their produce, but they need to make money from it. So the more we use it, the more we demand these products, the more that will come, the cheaper that they will become as well.
Okay, great. Great way to end the show. And I am hoping to see you soon again, so we can continue this conversation and getting the community to be healthier.
Yes, yes.
You know, so this is the end of our show. Hope to see you next Tuesday, same place, same time. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time.
Yes.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
And you didn't even give a call while we were here.
No, well, I don't know.